make mindfulness your own and, find tools, or whether it's apps or books that resonate with you, and just, be empowered in that process. Because again, if we emphasize just this playfulness and curiosity, there's no wrong way of getting to know mindfulness and making it part of your life. And then I would encourage people to at some point do a class or do a retreat or find, some people to connect with around mindfulness, because through the sharing of how is it for me, how is it for you, it really, you're learning a lot, and it's more fun and it's more engaging, helps you stick with it.
ADHD Rewired, episode 373. This is the podcast for those of us with really good intentions and a slightly wandering attention. I'm Eric Tivers. I'm a licensed clinical social worker by training and a coach by design. I'm your host, and I have ADHD. ADHD Rewired is more than just a podcast. We are a community. We are wired for connection, and you are not alone. Go to ADHDrewired.com to learn how you can join us in our free secret Facebook group. Get additional resources for every episode, including links to any resources we mention on today's show. You can support us on Patreon, sign up for our email newsletter, you can request podcast postcards to distribute to your clients and support groups, and you can learn all about our intensive online video-based coaching and accountability groups. You can do all of this at our website, ADHDrewired.com. We know that starting is the hardest part, so let's get started. Welcome back to another episode of ADHD Rewired. Today's guest is Dr. Lidia Zylowska. Lidia is an associate professor at the University of Minnesota Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences, and a faculty member at the University of Minnesota Earl E. Bakken Center for Spirituality and Healing. She is an internationally recognized expert in adult ADHD and mindfulness-based therapies. Her research work pioneered the application of mindfulness in ADHD, developed at the Mindful Awareness Practices for ADHD program, and helped co-found the UCLA Mindful Awareness Research Center. Her work has been featured in Adhd magazine, Time magazine, Boston Globe, and the New York Times. Dr. Zylowska is also a diplomat of the American Board of Integrative Holistic Medicine and the author of now 2 books. The first, The Mindful Prescription for Adult ADHD, and Mindfulness for Adult ADHD, A Clinician's Guide. Lidia, so good to finally have you on.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you for the introduction and for having me here. I'm really excited to have this conversation.
How long ago was it when I met you at the CHAD conference in Orlando, and I felt like we talked forever there.
Yeah, it's probably now, I would say, over 7 years or so. It was such a nice conversation then because mindfulness was still coming up as an intervention. We've done our research at UCLA. I think my book was already out at that point. But it was still a fairly new intervention for ADHD, and kind of a hot topic that people would, I think, be either very excited about or very skeptical about. And so it was, I think our conversation was really interesting to me, to just kind of hear your opinions about it and questions about it. And I hope that we continue that today, because as mindfulness has entered the ADHD world more and more, and people are recognizing, this is helpful. We have more research now, research studies, particularly with adults with ADHD, that mindfulness can help with ADHD symptoms as well as the related difficulties like emotional regulation. I think there's still a lot of questions. And as people say, I know I should be practicing, they also say, I don't know if I can do it or how to do it.
Yes, I do hear a lot about that. I had someone who is a extremely inconsistent on again, off again meditator. I find mindfulness not as a meditation practice, but more of just like mindful awareness is such an important part of just how I go through life. It's just kind of like that simple question of like, hey, is this what I want to be doing right now? No? Oh, all right. Like, how did I get here? Being really just kind of curious about it and bringing myself back. Because I think especially with how much shame is such a just this toxic weight that so many adults with ADHD carry, of the things they feel they should be doing, all the judgments, all the sort of those value statements that we have about what we are or are not doing, that I think that mindfulness, sort of that mindful awareness, is such a helpful sort of perspective to kind of go through life living with ADHD. But what I want to do first, if for people who like, I don't actually know what mindfulness actually is, like I hear it's about meditation, or can you just kind of give the definition that you use when describing mindfulness?
Yeah, so I'll go with the definition that's very often quoted, and this comes from Jon Kabat-Zinn, sort of the father of mindfulness-based stress reduction program. And he talks about, paying attention to the present moment, non-judgmentally. And if you dissect it out a little bit, mindfulness is about doing something with your attention and also doing something with your attitude. And so you bring attention to the present moment, and that can be done in meditation. And you kind of train different meditation practices to help you connect to the present moment. But you're also learning to shift your attitude, or maybe perspective, in a way to be more curious, more open, and non-judgmental of what's happening. As you were saying, we have so many judgments often about, I should be doing this, I shouldn't be doing this, I should be feeling this, I should be not feeling this. We judge our thoughts. So it's those two components, the shift in attention and shift in attitude, that to me are the core aspects of mindful awareness. And mindfulness, sometimes, it's not the best term. I don't like the term mindfulness because it makes you think of mindlessness, or it makes you feel like, what is it? It doesn't really describe. So it is an attention, awareness, and attitude shift. Overall, you have these components constantly playing off each other, and helping you get to know what is happening, right now, and how can I learn from it? How can I make a decision or a choice right now about how I show up in this moment, and then you know all these consecutive moments are how I show up in my life.
Mm. I sometimes hear, on just looking at the definition of mindfulness, that component where it's doing it without judgment, but also with curiosity. And from sort of that like lens of don't focus on what not to do, focus on what to do. I think that curiosity piece is sort of the opposite of the judgment. And so it's like, well, if you're just thinking about not judging yourself, well, how do you kind of do that? And I think that the curiosity piece is such an important. And I like to, when I'm sitting to whether it's a formal mindfulness practice or just experiencing my day in a mindful way, I try to go through it not just with curiosity, but sort of playful curiosity. Because I think sometimes the places that our mind goes can be so just outrageously absurd that laughing at it and like, how did I get there? With just this like wonderment and yes, it's without judgment, but I think it's what's the sort of the ingredients we're bringing to that not judgment that I think is so important. So for me, it's curiosity, it's playfulness, it's wonder. So how much of the work that you're doing are sort of teaching those components of it?
Yeah, I love that you emphasize this. This is very much the spirit of this work, of bringing mindfulness to ADHD. To call it an exploration, to make it fun, to say play with attention, play with awareness, be curious. And it's very much about saying, we don't know what your experience is going to be like. We don't know how it's, how this is going to go for you. But if you are curious, you will learn things about yourself. You will discover things, and we can bring more understanding by doing this in the moment. And then again, ultimately, kind of you start noticing things about how you work, how your brain works. And for ADHD, that has such a value. Be curious about how your brain works, right? Or be curious what makes things easier for you, what makes things harder for you. And that's very, whether that's through meditation, and I do think meditation or mindfulness practices, as you said, done in a meditation or maybe just a brief shift in daily life, can bring that deeper understanding. But there are other ways to bring curiosity to ADHD, and that's through coaching, through therapy, through reading about ADHD. And that's such a big component of training too, is to bring education about ADHD. So you have something, you actually know how to observe things. You have some language for it. And that's the over, it's a big umbrella of saying, how do we bring non-judgmental or curious awareness to someone with ADHD?
Looking at stuff through this lens of, I think curiosity often leads me to sort of fascination. Maybe I'm just someone who's easily fascinated by all kinds of things, right? Maybe that's one of my traits of having ADHD, or just it's part of who I am. As a clinician, as a researcher, what have been some of like the most fascinating things that you have been discovering through your research over the last 10 years or so?
That's a good question. What I would say on a kind of a personal level, first getting into this world of mindfulness and mindfulness research, a big aha moment for me was the fact that I can pay attention to my attention. And I think for a lot of people, when they start learning it, that's still kind of a key point, that I can start noticing where my attention goes naturally, and I can also play with bringing it intentionally to something else. And even just noticing the flow of how attention has this movement to it, and how awareness has also movement to it. Depending how much you lock in the attention, your awareness changes. You can have peripheral awareness. So to me, that's been a very enlightening, discovery in a way. This wondering about my attention, how is that affecting awareness, and vice versa. The other piece, I think, is that there's no one way that works for everybody. First of all, ADHD is not a uniform condition, as you know. We have subtypes of inattentive, predominantly inattentive, disorganized type. We have hyperactive, impulsive type, or a combined type. But even that doesn't do justice to the fact that everyone has their unique characteristics and their strengths and their weaknesses. They might work in different environments, so the environment may support them or make it more challenging for them. And so I think encouraging people to use mindfulness to both understand themselves, but then also to say, as I understand myself, what mindfulness practices are for me and what may not be for me. Like, I can stick with this. This really makes sense to me. And these are just too hard. And as you said, if you just simplify it and say it's all about curiosity and like playfulness, then, you really can help yourself not to have too many preconceived notions of what is mindfulness. And you can start really experimenting in your daily life. Like, what do I notice in the present moment? Or what do I notice about myself? Or this interaction that's going on.
I mean, in this, to me, sounds it's almost like a very like cerebral sort of value of mindfulness. And what I would like to do is really bring it to a very practical level for someone who's like, okay, like I have ADHD, like I can't sit and meditate. So what I tell people from my personal experience, the benefits that I have on a day-to-day level when I am in a good mindfulness meditation practice is just two big things that I notice in my life. One, my pause button just works a heck of a lot better. Like I can pause in that moment. The other thing that I notice, and this is probably one of the most significant ones, is I'll notice there's something that I don't really want to do. There's the sort of that internal narrative of I don't want to. And the next thing I know, I'm doing it. And then all of a sudden I'm like, like where was that resistance? It almost felt like I had the thought, but I didn't respond to the thought in a behavioral way. So I know for myself when I am engaged in a pretty regular practice. So when I say regular practice, I'm talking like a couple times a week for like 10 minutes at max at a time, right? Like it's doing it on my own. I really struggle meditating on my own. So what are some of the other sort of day-to-day practical functional benefits of mindfulness meditation?
So we'll talk about benefits, and I think I would like to talk about ways to practice because I think there's, I want to have maybe give people options of how they can practice. But in terms of benefits, we do know that people report better focus or at least better ability to catch themselves when they're not focused. Okay. And then, so they have more of that sense. I'm more in control of my attention. You also see that there is more ability to handle difficult situation, whether it's difficult tasks, like the ones you might procrastinate on, or emotions, difficult emotions. Because what mindfulness teaches you is to sort of notice the thoughts or the feelings with some space, between you as the observer and what's coming up for you. And then you do have that choice of, oh, here's the thought I want to procrastinate, but maybe I will tackle it anyway. Or here's this feeling that I want to scream, and I can say I'm angry. And there are ways to kind of help you then decide, maybe I'll do some deep breathing, or I decide I need some time out and go for a walk, or I dig a little deeper. What's another feeling underneath? So you have options of how to work with feelings. So in a way, your attention can improve, your ability to tackle difficult things, your emotional regulation improves. People can also feel more that their memory improves. And we have research showing that working memory, the type of memory that's affected by ADHD, example of working memory failing is, you set out to go get a glass of water, you go to the kitchen, and then you're like, well, what? Why am I here? Well, I know I'm here for a reason, but why? So that's when working memory, is like a temporary lapse of it, and it usually comes back to you after a moment. But having less of those lapses and just feeling like, I'm more present to myself, what I set out to do. It's also easier to self-correct because you catch yourself more readily. Like, oh, I was supposed to be doing this and now I'm surfing the internet. And then so as you practice mindfulness, the ability of step out of what we call the automatic pilot becomes stronger, right? So you're not like caught up in something.
So I did notice that we do need to just take a moment to step out of this part of the conversation for a quick break, but we will be right back. Support for ADHD reWired comes from our coaching community. It's the last week of April, which means more pickleball, frisbee golf, bike riding, and our summer season of coaching and accountability groups will be here soon. If you want to learn how to prioritize your goals and make your to-do lists more ADHD friendly, head over to coachingrewired.com. Get on our summer season interest list by clicking on the red button at the top of the page. We'll have dates for the 25th season of coaching and accountability groups posted soon. In the meantime, Go to coachingrewired.com to get your name on our summer interest list and learn more about our intensive online coaching and accountability groups. That's coachingrewired.com. That's coachingrewired.com. I use Adult Study Hall on demand all the time, where I can just hop into a Zoom room, especially on those days when I'm fighting resistance to the tasks that seem to be extra hard to get started on. And soon, you'll be able to jump in too. If you've signed up to join the Adult Study Hall community and can't wait to start working with other people with ADHD, keep an eye out in your email to find out when the virtual doors will open to your ADHD-friendly co-working space. I am still aiming to announce the opening date by April 30th. If you've added your name to the list at adultstudyhall.com, you will be the first to know the exact date when you can join. Already, we have 5 ongoing member-hosted study halls that will be available 5 days a week. If you need to jump in anytime, anywhere, Adult Study Hall On Demand is also available 24 hours a day, every day of the week. So you never have to work alone again. Also included with every Adult Study Hall membership, you can join our Adult Study Hall Plus sessions, or ASH Plus. Members can join these scheduled study hall events with themed and guided co-working sessions to help provide a little extra structure to finish anything on your to-do list related to that session. Sessions like Task Busters, a 2-hour session where you can come on with 1 to 2 dreaded tasks that you've been putting off. Tell us about the task that you've been putting off and then get to work. Your ASH Plus facilitator will check in with you once at the halfway point and one more time at the end. Once our virtual doors open, the first 100 members to join the Adult Study Hall community will become a part of our founders. These 100 founding members will be able to lock in their membership rate at 50% off the monthly membership cost. As long as you're an active member, your cost will never increase for the life of your membership. Access and membership to the Adult Study Hall community is only $19.99 a month. You will have access to Adult Study Hall On Demand and all ASH Plus sessions and anything else we could think of. Go to adultstudyhall.com and add your name to the list if you haven't already to get your chance at locking in our founders rate of only $9.99 a month. That's adultstudyhall.com. Adult Study Hall is all one word, adultstudyhall.com. We'll see you soon. All right, we are back. So we are returning our attention now to our conversation. And so we were talking about some of the benefits. I was sharing about my ability to sort of pause, my ability to engage in something that I don't really want to do. You were talking about other benefits, including working memory, emotional self-regulation. What else has the research really shown as benefits for mindfulness meditation?
There are studies looking at what's called executive functions, and that's a familiar word for many people with ADHD. This has to do with just ability to monitor yourself throughout the day, in a sense, like we call it self-control or self-management or self-regulation. Those are big words, but the ability just to kind of track yourself, and emotional regulation is piece of that. But just to me, it's again having an intention, setting out an intention, and following through. That's a lot of what executive function is about, and also, not being overwhelmed by things, but having some ability to prioritize and filter out what's important, what's not. So that tends to improve with mindfulness meditation as well. So to me, on a practical level, it often comes down to the sense of overwhelm, because people often get very stressed and overwhelmed because they have difficulty organizing themselves or their day, or they set out for a plan, and then if they're not meeting that plan, then there's this secondary overwhelm, right? Like, the day's going by, I can't get it done. So having some ability to notice that feeling of overwhelm, name it for yourself, then check in and like with your body, and then um, do something for, with the way you guide yourself internally. We all have these internal voices, right? Or I call it self-coaching. And you can, it can be to your peril, like, really, you can berate yourself and
I call that our itty bitty shitty committee.
there you go. Yeah. And, that can really actually increase that sense of stress and overwhelm. Or you can activate this more mindful self-coaching that, that can guide you to say, okay, this is what's happening. It is what it is. Can I have compassion for myself? Can I remind myself this happens with ADHD? And then, what are some tools that I know about that could help me? Maybe, I have, it's okay. I can be flexible. I got 2 out of 5. Can I be okay with that? Can I be actually appreciative I got 2? And maybe just have curiosity about it. Why was it only 2? As opposed to 5, the items on your to-do list? Was it that you underestimated that these 2 will, you thought it's gonna take you half an hour each, but actually they were more complex. And, there are other things involved. Maybe it's because you ended up surfing the internet all day. But no, don't be judgmental and berating yourself, because that doesn't help you problem solve. That actually just creates a spiral of, like, doom and shame, and people often give up problem solving.
It's funny when in my coaching groups, I often will tell people that, if I thought that, sort of beating ourselves up like was a helpful approach, I would try to come up with some really creative exercises that can come up with the most effective ways to beat ourselves up. And it's like, sort of when I present it that way, it sort of highlights the absurdity of like how not helpful beating ourselves up is. And so it's sort of underscoring the idea that self-compassion is the way forward. Like, no matter what you're trying to do, it's so hard to, how do you move forward without having this just massive amount of self-compassion moving forward? Because it's hard, and we're going to stumble, and we're not going to always meet our intentions. And like, it takes so much courage to keep getting back up over and over again. Right? And so I just think that component of being just curious, because if you're to be able to allow yourself to ask what I call the curious why, versus why can't I do this, which is the judgmental why. It's like,
right?
Why can't I do this? Like, same words, but really shifting what you're thinking about, and like trying to identify like what the problem or obstacle is versus you being the problem or obstacle.
Right, exactly. And a lot of times I hear from people this statement that this should be easy. What's wrong with me? I know this is easy, and I just can't do it. Well, if you're not doing it, it's not easy for you.
Doesn't matter what it is.
Right. Let's figure this out. Like, what makes it difficult? And that's where mindfulness shift can happen. Um, Apart from meditation practice. So in meditation, formal practice, you train these skills, but then you apply them in real life. So when ADHD moments happen, of, let's say, something you're procrastinating on something, that's when you do this brief shift, the mindful shift of bringing that curious attention inward and saying, okay, what are my thoughts? What are my feelings? What comes up for me when I think about this task? And acknowledging I have these ton of these judgmental thoughts. And that's okay, because that they're normal too, but they're just thoughts. So what else is there? What other feelings may be there? Because sometimes when you start judging yourself, you don't even realize that underneath there is fear of, like, I don't know how to do this. But part of me says, this is easy, just get it done. And that's where the judgment comes. But there may be a sense of being unsure, or, some sort of fear, or some sort of feeling that's fueling this procrastination. And actually, mindfulness can, as you tune in to your body, to yourself, you have the ability to get in touch with that. And, feelings have power when they're not acknowledged. Once you acknowledge them and see them, you can work with it.
You just mentioned getting into your body, which makes me sort of think about, because I've been doing a lot of just sort of learning about the role of trauma and how sort of trauma, the intersectionality between trauma and ADHD. So I wanted to sort of explore that, but I also know that we said we were going to talk about some practical strategies on meditation. So I want to sort of put a pin in the trauma piece, and I do want to come back to it. And I just wrote it on my sticky note, and I'm circling it. Hopefully I remember to look back down at that. But let's talk about some practical strategies on how to meditate in a mindful way.
Yeah. So you can do meditation, mindful meditation practice, and that's setting aside some time to do meditation. And that could be from 1 minute to 15 minutes to 20 minutes. I mean, whatever you're able to do it. I often recommend starting with 5, and then if that feels too much, you can shorten it.
So what does the science say when, because if someone says that, 1 minute, is that really going to matter? Like, what is the science actually shown about the benefits of a regular 1 minute meditation practice?
So there is some early research, and this hasn't been really researched thoroughly, but that, to see benefits, the 12-minute amount is sort of the sweet spot. That's when you start seeing the different benefits to attention and other, factors related to emotions, anxiety, things like that. Particularly for working memory, this was a study looking at working memory, that the benefits were at after you meditated 12 minutes or more, kind of an awkward number. But to me, from a clinical experience, short amounts have a value too, and also help you get into a practice that you could work up to 5, 10, 15 minutes. And these other benefits can then kick in as well. So with with shorter practices, the first thing is that you learn to step away from busy mind. Okay, because when you're in your busy mind, you are more distracted. Your attention is consumed by the busy mind. You can also be more reactive and caught in patterns of thinking and feeling. So the short practices in meditation is, let's bring the attention to something else other than your busy mind. So let's say you set out some time to sit down quietly. And usually it's helpful to kind of identify what is the spot where I will do this formal practice. And for a lot of people, that may be a chair. Sometimes people lay down. Usually we recommend sitting up because you could fall asleep if you lay down. And, you could set up your timer. You can do it on your own. You can do it with guidance. The guidance is helpful for beginners because the voice of the guidance will bring you back to the practice. It's so
helpful. It's especially when I'm coming back from sort of a hiatus of meditation. It's like, unless I'm just ready to watch the theater of my mind, which is usually the first 2 weeks back of meditation, and where it's just like all those internal, but I actually find that really helpful to just notice how busy my internal dialogue is. And how frequently my mind sort of wanders away from my breath and goes to these random thoughts. And just it's sort of almost like a litmus test on just how am I doing right now? Right. So I actually find it really helpful, even though it's maybe it wasn't the most relaxing sit or the most rejuvenating sit. It's okay, this is where I'm at right now. And that's okay.
Yep. So when you say, I'm going to practice, you sit down with no expectation, you will be relaxed, or your mind will go blank. Those are kind of misconceptions that make it frustrating for people. It's more like check in, do the guided practice and just see what happens. And so typically in those early meditation practices, you would say, focus on the breath. And then you find that it's hard to focus on the breath. So then returning to the breath is really the practice, as many times as you need to, while there may be a lot going on. Other ways to to do the practice is to focus on sensory input. So we call it the 5 senses practice, and that's you could do a mindful eating practice. That's often an easy one to start with. This is not so much formal, but it's like you do it. You can do it often in the course of your day, that you just tune in a little bit to like the smell and the texture of the food. Notice how you're chewing it and swallowing.
Kind of slow it down.
Slow it down, and slow it down for maybe just a minute of your meal. Okay. So a nice practice would be, as you're sitting down to eat, um, you know, be curious how you start your eating. For a lot of people, it's like very quickly
Right.
you're doing something else.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing will be just be curious how you eat your lunch. And then how about you do the start of your lunch in a little more intentional way, slow down. Deeper breath, 1 cup of deeper breaths as a transition to eating. And then as you do those first few bites, do it with this intentional awareness of like how it smells, how it tastes, how it feels in your mouth. And then typically it's too hard to have a whole meal that way, especially if you're on a limited time. But that gives you that short 1 minute practice creates a break from your attention being constantly wrapped up in this doing, thinking mode. So it creates a flexibility. You think of it as a cognitive flexibility training.
It's interesting. As you were saying this, I think I realized just now why I love my very first sip of coffee in the morning. Because I think I've always done it in a very mindful way. I always like cup it in my hands. I feel the warmth. I take a deep breath like through my nose. So I'm inhaling the aroma of it. Then I take a very sort of like a luxurious sip and sort of just like keep it in my mouth for a little bit. And I close my eyes while doing it. I don't think I ever realized I actually do that until you were describing what you were just doing. I'm like, that's probably why I think that first sip of coffee in the morning is like one of the best moments of the day, like every day.
Yeah, and that could be a mindfulness practice for someone. Like my morning coffee, I'm going, you're doing this spontaneously, right? But you could say, okay, my whole cup of coffee, maybe I'll really try to work, make it my practice. So I'll do a little bit more of that intentionally, not just, maybe for the first 2 sips, but as, a little longer.
Yeah.
As a practice.
Yeah, so I find too that like getting out of we were saying earlier about like instead of saying what not to do, it's helpful to focus on what to do. And I think that focusing on sensory channels is such a helpful sort of framework for mindfulness. It's like, instead of like thinking about what you're feeling, like, because then you're in thinking brain, right? Just feel. Right? Like, what are you feeling? And as soon as you start putting words to it, now you're thinking, like, which is this weird, like, it's this weird balance.
Yeah. And, it's like thinking, feeling highway, right? Goes up and down. But the 5 connecting to senses is sort of like a break on that a little bit. Like, so if I'm stressed or if you feel overwhelmed, it's almost could be like a mantra, or you write if you write this on the sticky note, when stressed, connect with 5 senses, and maybe even make it more concrete. Tune into sounds around you, because 1 sense, right? Of and sounds are always there. So you step out of this busy mind and like, okay, let's just hear what's happening out. Like, do I hear any traffic? Do I hear birds chirping? Maybe there's noise in the other room. You bringing attention from up here to like what's coming through your ears. And that's already a shift. You unhooking yourself from the mode that's often creating stress, the busy thinking, the busy, processing mode, and allowing yourself to drop a little bit. You can also drop it even further to drop into your body, like start with the breath and then also drop with start noticing the body. Like, is there tension in the body? Do I feel like a sensation? And emotions live in the body, but you're not going through this very high, fast sort of feedback of I'm stressed, I'm feeling maybe nervous, and then I have these nervous thoughts, and they're just feeding each other. You want to break that loop in some way, so you're not stuck in it. So by saying what's in the present moment, and then one of the most easiest thing is to say, sounds, or I feel the temperature in the room, or I even notice my hands, rubbing my hands a little bit, put them on my face. So you tune into that as a way to create that pause, and then you move into the body, because that's another nice anchor away from the mind, but also because you can understand your feelings a little bit more through the body and unpack them a little bit more, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And that's maybe, a good point to come back to trauma.
Yeah, let's before we get into that, let's just try to be mindful on time. So we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll talk about the body and trauma as we wrap up this conversation. So we will be right back. Support for ADHD Rewired comes from our Patreon community. Whether you're new to the podcast or you're a longtime listener, I want to ask you, what's one of the biggest takeaways you've ever had while listening to this podcast? And have you considered becoming a patron member because you learn something new about your ADHD each week? If you do, consider giving a monthly contribution to help support this podcast. We want to give a warm and grateful welcome to Kathleen W. at the $3 a month level, Tony H. at the $10 a month level, and Olga B. at the $25 a month level. Thank you for your support and welcome to the Patreon community. And thank you to all of our continuing patron members who give anywhere from $3 to $25 a month. We are so grateful for you. If you're looking for ad-free episodes of this podcast, a separate podcast feed is available to members contributing at the $5 a month level or more. That's right, you can get a private feed without the ads. Patron members contributing at the $25 a month level will get all of the perks I just mentioned from every level. And you could also join me once a month for a patrons-only group coaching call that we do every fourth Tuesday of the month, which is today, if you're listening to this on the day it came out. Our group coaching call starts at 3 p.m. Central Time, which is 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. Now, if you love the podcast and you don't mind the ads and you're not interested in the perks, you can contribute any amount that fits your budget, whether it's $3 or $30 or more. Becoming a patron is a great way for you to say thank you with your financial support. Podcasts are free to you, the listener, but they are not free to produce. The editing and post-production costs alone costs an average of $600 a month. Any contribution is welcome and very much appreciated. If you are here listening week after week, I want you to know that I appreciate you too. But if you do want to become a member of our Patreon community, get extra perks, and show some financial support for the podcast, then head on over to ADHDrewired.com/Patreon, or just click the Patreon tab at the top of the ADHDrewired.com page. That's ADHDrewired.com/Patreon. And thanks. Do you know about all the other podcasts we have here on the ADHD Rewired Podcast Network? Check out ADHD Essentials with Brendan Mahan. Brendan focuses on parents and parenting with ADHD through interviews similar to this podcast. Brendan talks to parents, educators, and experts with ADHD to pick out some of the best strategies you can find. Go to ADHDessentials.com to find out more about Brendan. Next up is Hacking Your ADHD with Will Curb. Will shares actionable tips in shorter, digestible episodes to help you do more of the things that you want to do. You can subscribe on the podcast app you're listening to this on right now, or go to hackingYourADHD.com. Then recently, we were joined by MJ Siemens, the host of ADHD Diversified. You'll hear relatable stories about their own ADHD experiences as a Canadian-born Asian. You can learn more about MJ and their latest episodes at ADHDdiversified.ca. or subscribe on the podcast app you're listening to this on right now. And congratulations to Moira Maven, who joined us most recently with her podcast called The ADHD Friendly Lifestyle. Moira's podcast is for people who are tired of just trying harder, with a focus on late diagnosed women, moms, and professionals who want to better understand their ADHD. Again, you can subscribe to that podcast on this podcast app that you're listening to this on right now, or find out more about her and her podcast at her website, ADHDfriendlylifestyle.com. If you enjoy listening to all of the podcasts on the ADHD reWired Podcast Network, or if you're listening to this and you just can't keep track of all the podcast names, go to ADHDrewired.com and you'll find all of us there. Just click on the podcast tab at the top of the page. This is the podcast network for people with ADHD by people with ADHD. We want to thank you, all of our listeners, for tuning in each and every week. And don't forget, you can join us on the second Tuesday of every month. Join all of us for a live Q&A at 12:30 p.m. Central Time. You can register for those Q&As at ADHDrewired.com/events. And don't forget, if you have not had a chance to subscribe or leave a rating and review on your podcast app that you listen to this on, please do that. It really helps other people find this podcast. Learn more about everything we do by going to ADHDrewired.com. And thanks. All right, we are back. All right, so right before the break, we were talking a little bit about, emotion lives in the body, and we're talking about trauma. So what I want to do for these last about 7 or 8 minutes, talk a little bit about that, and then give you a couple strategies to take away from this.
Yeah. So, trauma is can affect anyone. Of course, if you have ADHD, you can also be affected by trauma. And we also think there's this connection between early trauma and a risk for ADHD. And some people also talk about how living with ADHD is stressful. And there's these, maybe smaller trauma, the big T trauma, the small T trauma, right. But you're accumulating a lot of negative
complex
experiences.
PTSD, the trauma by 1,000 paper cuts.
Exactly. And, when you have those experiences, oftentimes you develop ways to cope with it by disconnecting from your body. This micro dissociations people talk about. There's in psychology, you can when the trauma is severe, you can have experiences of dissociating and kind of feeling out of your body and not always remembering what happened in that traumatic moment. But you can also have these lower magnitude ways of moving away from your feelings and not attending to them, or like if a feeling comes up, you quickly distract yourself or get busy, and people may have coping strategies through being workaholic to not to feel them, their feelings, or they may end up overeating or substances. So trauma can lead to these other, unhelpful ways of coping. So mindfulness approach to trauma is to try to help the person connect with their feelings in a safe way without feeling overwhelmed by them or re-traumatized by them. And so there's a lot of, going back and forth between let's get you to feel grounded first in the present moment by maybe looking around, feeling the chair where you're sitting, kind of feeling your body weight and your breathing, and using that grounding whenever you do start feeling like the trauma is getting too intense. At the same time, you can also start having that question in mind, like, as I come back to a difficult experience, or I think of, what's happening for me today, how can I be with my emotions safely? And it's a little bit, it's like working with pain. So working with physical pain with mindfulness and working with emotional pain with mindfulness is similar. you sort of dip your toe, and then when it feels too intense, you go to a neutral or a safe place in your body. So, for example, you'll say, um, you know, let's say you're having a difficult moment, and the first thing would be to have curiosity, like what feelings am I having, and naming it, like because you name it, you tame it. So there's anger, or there is shame, or there's sadness, and then if you start, if that feels intense, you could always say, take a deep breath, or notice your feet on the ground, notice, your arms on the seat, and then kind of come back to that. Usually it's through a memory. You're like trying to recall what happened, and, notice what thoughts are coming up, what ideas or beliefs are coming up, because what keeps trauma in place is often that you have these judgments about yourself. I shouldn't have felt that, or I was weak, or this was wrong. There's something wrong with me. Um, and so just starting to create space for all those feelings and thoughts to be acknowledged, and create also, curiosity. What is the feeling teaching me? And oftentimes just exploring, like, what is the feeling of anger like? Or what is the feeling of sadness like? What do I feel in my body? Is my breathing changing when I really feel it? Um, is my posture different? Oftentimes people might change their posture when they're really feeling things, and knowing that feeling is not gonna kill you. That you can do it safely. If it gets too much, you can always regroup and go to that safe place of your breath, or reconnecting with here and now kind of thing, by looking around. And but just having this faith that if I feel this feeling, it's like a wave. It washes over me, and oftentimes it loses its impact as I stay with it, and then I can also learn from it. Because you often, if you experience anger, it kind of loses intensity, and then you could say, what else is there? Well, maybe there's sadness underneath.
So on a very practical level, because I know that a lot of people I talk to who really struggle with that emotional self-regulation, where they get very flooded by a strong emotion, what would be maybe one or two sort of practical things that they can maybe try on their own as these things are kind of coming on?
Yeah. So couple ways, and I would want people to just, again, explore and play with it and see what works for them. So one way is just say, whenever you're having a strong feeling, try to put a name on it, like label it. So it's really just kind of acknowledging that the feeling is there and putting some language on it. And we actually have research that shows that when you do that, you engage in the prefrontal cortex, and the amygdala activity comes down. So when you're angry, let's say, you just say anger, 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 and just stay with that for a bit and see what happens. Does that change? And is there a shift in your body? Is the feeling getting stronger? Sometimes that happens, but does it then come down at some point? So just this naming piece. Um, and so you create some pause to just say, okay, I'm having this feelings. And then silently, maybe I can just name it for a while, like overwhelm, like you name overwhelm for a while. So that's one very, very brief practice of tuning in, shifting attention, and then this, what we call labeling in mindfulness practice, just naming it. Another practice that's really helpful is it's called RAIN. So it's like recognize, accept, investigate, and then not personalize. I actually like also some people, the N stands for nourish, and like nourish with self-compassion. So what it really says is when you're feeling off, bring attention inward and say, what is happening? Like, what feelings are present? So recognize, I am having this feeling, like, I'm feeling really afraid, or, I don't know how to start. I'm feeling unsure, and accept it. because oftentimes you recognize it, but you're like, I don't want to have it. This is wrong. I shouldn't be feeling this. So like fully embracing it. It's here. I'm having this feeling. And then investigate in the body. It's like go into the body a little bit more. Like notice, am I clenching my jaw? Are my shoulders really tight? Is there like a pit in my stomach? Just kind of notice it a little bit. And then, also notice like what are some of these thoughts around it. And then remind yourself it's just a feeling. It's okay. Can I have compassion for myself that this is happening? And just sort of, sit with it a little bit, because that's where often, as you sit with the feeling, your inner wisdom can come up and say like, okay, like, what is this teaching me? What's the next step? So having that, I want to just engender that curiosity. Like, what if I were just to sit with my feeling? What happens? If the feeling is too hard to sit with, maybe you need another person to guide you through it, whether it's a coach or, therapist, especially if there's history of trauma. It may be just a little too hard on your own. So working with somebody else, or maybe even just talking to somebody who can help you, like talk it through with a friend or a family member. So just know that sometimes on your own, it's hard. Some people bring their spiritual beliefs to mindfulness practice. So when they're really feeling like a strong feeling and they really find themselves in the pits of shame, for example, that's a very hard feeling. Really bringing up, either a person that's really compassionate in their life. Sometimes it's maybe a spiritual being can help them kind of work through it on their own. If they're not really working with somebody else. So there's different, and that you can explore it for yourself. People have different things that resonate with them. So exploring, what do I need in this moment? That's part of that mindful exploration is, I recognize the feeling, I accept it, I investigate, and then I, I know it's just a feeling, so I don't identify with it, but then I nourish with self-compassion or with what is it that I need in this moment? Like what, maybe there is some need that I haven't acknowledged for myself. Maybe I need to go and talk to this person. Maybe I'm hungry. I mean, as simple as that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or, maybe I need to rethink how I'm going about this.
I wanted to I want to share one of my favorite sort of mindfulness exercises because I'm always humored by it because it's a really predictable sort of pattern. So it's the idea of it's a breathing exercise where you start at 1 and go up to 10. So it's you inhale 1, exhale 1, inhale 2, exhale 2, and so on. And the key is if you have any other thoughts before you get to 10, you start over. And so I often will lead my groups in this meditation, and almost without fail, I get to about 8. My brain goes, "You're almost there," and then I have to start over. Which is just like, to me, it's funny, and it's like it's what my brain does. Right. So I think it's a fun because it sort of gamifies it a little bit. 'Cause I think anything that can just engage and invite us to sort of sit with it and do it and know that like, man, if you got to 5 without your brain going somewhere else, that's amazing. Like give yourself a pat in the back for that. Cause that's, it takes practice. And to me, that's what really mindfulness has been all about for me is it's a practice, and it's not like, as soon as you start thinking, am I doing this right or wrong? Like, then you're not being mindful because there is really no right or wrong way, right? I mean, you agree with that?
I totally agree with that. It's again, be curious what your experience is, and what your experience is okay, and have some fun with it. So yeah, it's, there is a challenge piece because you're trying to train something and improve something like this attentional muscle. But, you know, you can, as you said, set out to do 10 breaths and then be curious what happens. and then actually notice, I veer off at 3 all the time. And now today I got out to 5. That's pretty good. That's not bad. And also, if you find like, this is really frustrating practice for me, okay, then maybe that's not a practice for you. Maybe the better practice would be doing mindful walking, watching your breath, but not counting. But like, as you moving, noticing the sensations on your feet, and then noticing your breath, and maybe noticing like the sounds around you.
I think exercise, especially like an exercise that's, if you're on a bike or running, something that's just or sort of a repetitive motion, I think is a great space for mindfulness. I mean, when I'm riding, I ride this thing called an elliptigo. It's like, it's a bike with wheels, but it's like the motion of an elliptical. And I get really into this mindful kind of like groove where I'm just like really paying attention to all my muscles, my joints, my mind is actually quiet. Like it's a lovely experience. And it's like when I'm doing something like that, to me, that's a great way that I practice mindfulness. I'm making sure I'm breathing, and then the breathing has a nice rhythm to it. And you don't just have to sit on your butt with your legs crossed. I mean, I never sit on my butt with my legs crossed. Like I find that to be so painfully uncomfortable. Like you'll never find me like I am in a chair. The back is good. I do sometimes lay down, but I keep my eyes open when I lay down. So there's all different kinds of way. And I think that mindfulness, as far as the meditation, also opens up a lot of space to play. Right. And I think that's,
that's the big mindful playing, that's really what it's all about. And there's just no one way of doing it that's right. I mean, as long as you bring attention to the present moment and be curious, then you're practicing mindfulness. And as you were talking, I was thinking sometimes it may be confusing to people. Like we talk about mindfulness being in the present moment and away from your thinking. And then sometimes we talk about tune into your thoughts and your emotions. So that sometimes feels maybe confusing. And I would say there's like 2 pieces to mindfulness. One piece is because so much of our lives we are wrapped up in thinking and distracted by the thinking. One part of mindfulness training that has benefits is to just create that flexibility for yourself to be away from that mode of busy thinking and being what we call automatic pilot. So you practice all these activities, find all these activities that help you to be more attuned to the present moment, either through like being on a bike, could be gardening, could be cooking, could be, deciding to do mindful eating. It could be even, a knitting because you're really, working with it. So anything that gets you out of that busy mind has value. And because what you often find that your stress level drops. And it helps you, your body kind of regulate to more relaxed mode when you do that. The other part of mindfulness practice is to say, I want to understand, like I want to expand my awareness of the inner world. Like I want to understand my thoughts and my feelings a little bit with that, from that witnessing perspective, or like from some space from it. So then I can actually decide what's helpful, what's not helpful. And that's when, once you develop some independence of being caught up in your thinking through these practices and, like I mentioned, being in the present moment, then you move inward with some control over like, I'm not going to just get sucked into thinking and feeling. I'm going to actually be able to observe this stuff and make some choices, some wise choices about what to do with my feeling or what to do with my thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Well, Dr. Lidia Zylowska, her books are Mindful Prescription for Adult ADHD and her brand new book, the Mindfulness for Adult ADHD, A Clinician's Guide. If you want to learn more about her or her books, you can go to lidiazylowska.com. It's ZYLOWSKA. I should probably spell your first name too, since it's not the most common spelling of that. We'll put the link in the show notes because I know lots of letters all at once. My brain goes wah, 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 wah. So just tap on the show notes, but it's LIDIAZYLOWSKA.com is her website. Any final thoughts?
make mindfulness your own and, find tools, or whether it's apps or books that resonate with you, and just, be empowered in that process. Because again, if we emphasize just this playfulness and curiosity, there's no wrong way of getting to know mindfulness and making it part of your life. And then I would encourage people to at some point do a class or do a retreat or find, some people to connect with around mindfulness, because through the sharing of how is it for me, how is it for you, it really, you're learning a lot, and it's more fun and it's more engaging, helps you stick with it.
Thank you so much for sharing the hour with us. We'll looking forward for people to hear this, because I think this is such an important topic, and I think there's still a lot of misinformation about it. So I appreciate the conversation. So thank you.
Likewise, thank you for having me. It's really fun to be here.
All right. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you enjoyed it, please feel free to share it on social media, or share it with someone else personally who you think would benefit from this. So we'll see you next time. Thanks. This is Eric Tivers. Thank you for listening, and congratulations for making it to the end. ADHD Rewired is more than just a podcast. We are a community focused on learning, growing, and connection. The website is adhdrewired.com. You can find summaries and additional resources for each episode. You can apply to our free and secret Facebook community. You can learn more about ADHD Rewired's intensive online video-based coaching and accountability groups, and sign up for my email newsletter to get exclusive content you won't get anywhere else. It's all at adhdrewired.com. While you're there, click the Patreon button. If you're a regular listener and you're still listening to my voice, consider making a monthly contribution by becoming a patron through our Patreon page. If you are able to financially support my work, it would mean a lot. This show is free to listeners, but it is not free to produce. And patrons get really cool perks. You can follow me on Twitter at Eric Tivers. You can like our Facebook page at facebook.com/ADHD Rewired. If you're a coach, therapist, or related professional, connect with me on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/Eric Tivers. You can also subscribe to ADHD Rewired on YouTube. And you can subscribe to ADHD Rewired on YouTube and see select interviews and some other videos I've posted. Podcasts change lives. You can make a difference in someone's life by spreading the word about this podcast. Mention it in your online communities on Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, or wherever you hang out online. And be sure to share it with your friends and your family and your clients, as well as your coaches, therapists, and doctors. And if you're a coach, therapist, doctor, or ADHD support group leader, and you would like a pack of podcast postcards to hand out, you can request those at my website, adhdrewired.com. And if you're a member of CHAD or any other ADHD support group, please be sure to tell them about this podcast. You can even show them how to download it on their phone. You might be the person that turns somebody on to a podcast for the very first time. And if you really love this episode, please consider hitting share on your podcast player. I'm only one person, and I count on you to help me spread the message. One of the biggest things that you can do to support this podcast and to help other people discover it is to leave an honest rating and review on Apple Podcasts, on Stitcher, or any other podcast app that accepts ratings and reviews. And don't forget to hit subscribe on this podcast on your podcast app so new episodes are automatically pushed to your favorite podcast app. Looking for more ways to listen and learn? Get a free audiobook and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/ADHD Rewired. Not sure where to start? In no particular order. Check out Atomic Habits by James Clear, The Body Keeps Score by Bessel van der Kolk, 10% Happier, and Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics. These are both by Dan Harris. Change Your Questions and Change Your Life by Marilee G. Adams. The One Thing by Gary Keller and Jay Papasan. Procrastinate on Purpose by Rory Vaden. The Four Tendencies by Gretchen Rubin. Do you have trouble asking for help? Listen to The Art of Asking by Amanda Palmer. It's one of the best produced audiobooks I've ever heard. If you're looking for something a little bit more, say, magical, I unexpectedly fell in love with the Harry Potter series. And I don't usually listen to those kinds of books, and I loved it. And of course, if you haven't yet boarded the Brene Brown bus yet, check out Brene Brown's books, starting with The Gifts of Imperfection, Daring Greatly, Rising Strong, The Power of Vulnerability, and if you're an entrepreneur or leader in any capacity, check out her 2018 book, Dare to Lead. And Brene still is my most wanted guest, so if you know Brene, and you would be so kind to make that connection for me, I would be really, really grateful. You know who else I would like to have on the show? You. Click the podcast tab at ADHDrewired.com and then click the Be a Guest button at the top of that page and schedule a 15-minute pre-interview. This is Eric Tivers, reminding you to keep learning, keep growing, and keep connecting. Self-care is not selfish, and no matter what gets done or doesn't get done, at the end of the day, you are still enough. And no matter how hard it feels, we can do hard things. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you next week.